Hello. In this video, we will discuss the construct called organizational commitment and a few related constructs. I think you will find this video very insightful, very useful, very interesting. Not just because organizational commitment is an important construct. It certainly is. But many of the lessons that you will learn here will be applicable also to your personal lives, to your intimate personal lives. But in context of organizations, in context of leadership, we will understand what we mean by organizational commitment, why it is important for leaders to enhance organizational commitment, and what could leaders do to enhance organizational commitment amongst their employees. These are some of the questions that we will try to answer in this video. Now, to put things in perspective, you will remember this big picture diagram that I discussed in my last lecture. You see organizational commitment here as one of the individual outcomes that leaders strive to enhance in their employees, in their subordinates, in their followers. We discussed job performance in great detail in that video. In this video, we will go over organizational commitment. And in the next video, I will talk about job satisfaction. So let's start our discussion with what is organizational commitment. The way we define it in our field is that it is an individual's psychological attachment to the organization. The way human beings get attached, psychologically attached to other people, to friends, to your lovers, to your spouses, to your children, right? Similarly, human beings can get attached to the organization where they are working. And this psychological attachment that you may have with the organization where you are working, that is what we mean by organizational commitment. If I elaborate that a little bit more, another definition would be organizational commitment is the desire on the part of an employee to remain a member of the organization. So if you have a strong desire to stay within that organization and not leave the organization, then it means that you have high organizational commitment. It's again very simple to understand if you compare it with the relationships that human beings have. Let's for simplicity's sake, let's talk about romantic relationships because that's where the term commitment is often used. So if you are in a committed relationship, what does it mean? It means that you are sticking with that person. You are not leaving that person, right? Same thing applies here. If you have high organizational commitment, you are sticking with that organization. You are deciding to stay in that organization. You are not thinking of leaving the organization. Simple. Now, there is a related construct which is called withdrawal behavior. So organizational commitment and withdrawal behavior, they almost go in the opposite directions. The more organizational commitment you have, the less likely you will engage in what we call our withdrawal behaviors. And the more you are engaging in withdrawal behaviors, the less organizational commitment you have. Again, similar to intimate relationships. If you are, even if you haven't actually broken with your girlfriend or boyfriend, but if you have started withdrawing from your partner, okay, then it means that you are not committed to this person anymore, or you don't feel committed to this person anymore, because you are staying aloof, you are not doing some of those things that you both used to do together, right? So the more you are engaging in those withdrawal behaviors, we would say that the less committed you are to the relationship, and vice versa. But the more committed you are to the relationship, the less likely you will be engaging in those withdrawal behaviors. If at all you may engage in some of those withdrawal behaviors when your mood is really bad, that will be, occasion, and on some rare occasion. So organizational commitment and withdrawal behavior, they go in opposite directions. Should be pretty simple and clear. Now let's try to gain a little bit more clarity about withdrawal behavior by going over the definition of withdrawal behavior. The way we define it is that it's a set of actions that employees perform to avoid the work situation. Again, it's very easy to understand withdrawal behavior if we compare it with the withdrawal behaviors that we may see, that we may have observed in context of intimate relationships. What happens there? The person who is withdrawing from the relationship, the person who is engaging in those withdrawal behaviors, essentially is doing what? The person is avoiding the partner. Things that they used to do together, they may be spending their evenings together, they may be having dinner together, but now they do their own thing, okay? Or the person who is withdrawing may go watch television instead of having dinner together, right? Or the person may spend a substantial amount of time outside the home, maybe with friends, or extraordinary amount of time at work, even though there is no any substantial reason why the person should be spending that extra amount of time at work. These could all be signs of withdrawal from the relationship. Similar things can happen in organizations. So if you are not feeling committed to the organization anymore, you may engage in withdrawal behaviors that may manifest in form of not wanting to put the kind of effort that you used to put in your work before. Earlier, you may be the person who used to be the first to come to the workplace, but now you may be showing up an hour or two late. Or while you are at the workplace, you may neglect your work, you may waste time. So, well, there could be multiple reasons, of course, for withdrawal behavior. That is the reason we have two separate constructs, withdrawal behavior and organizational commitment. If they were just the opposite of each other, then of course we didn't need to have two separate constructs, right? Because it's like picking up one end of the stick means you are automatically picking up the other end of this stick if they are exactly opposite of each other. So there could be many reasons why you may see withdrawal behavior. For example, you may still be committed to the person, let's say in context of relationship, you may still be committed to the person, but you are going through some depression state because of whatever problems that you are having, and that is the reason you don't feel like spending time with your you don't feel like sharing, you don't feel like communicating with your partner, right? So any time that you see withdrawal behavior does not automatically mean that the person is not committed to the relationship. Same situation can happen also in context of organizational commitment. So withdrawal behaviors can be a sign of low organizational commitment, but there could be other factors that may be contributing to those withdrawal behaviors as well. We will touch upon some of those factors, in this lecture and in later lectures. But you could think of some possible reasons why people may withdraw, right? Maybe the person is going through a lot of stress in his personal life, due to which the person is less engaged or is disengaged from the work, right? That's a possibility, which means then it is not that the person is lacking in organizational commitment, but the person is going through an extremely stressful phase, due to which we are seeing this person to be withdrawing from work. Anyway, hope you got the message here, but organizational commitment and withdrawal behaviors tend to be negatively correlated, and they can often be signs of withdrawal behaviors can often be signs of low organizational commitment. So these behaviors, if you see a lot of withdrawal behaviors over a prolonged period of time, eventually this may mean that the person will quit. So they often culminate in the person quitting the organization. With the discussion that we have had so far, you would surmise that withdrawal behaviors are bad for the organization, and organizational commitment is great for the organization. And in general, that's true, because if somebody is wanting to stick around, that's good, right? Especially if the person is a good worker, uh, then that's good for the organization. And if somebody is withdrawing, not engaging in those committed behaviors, then that's bad for the organization. But is organizational commitment always good? Or are there gradations of organizational commitment? Are there certain forms of organizational commitment that are more desirable for the organization, for the leader, than others? To answer this question, we would need to delve deeper into the topic of organizational commitment. And by that, I mean we have to discuss the different types of organizational commitment. And broadly, there are three types, as you can see here in this slide. Now, when we are talking about types of organizational commitment, we are talking about the reasons, the different reasons that people have to stay in the organization. So each of these different types have different reasons associated with people's commitment to the organization. So the first reason that we see here, or the first type of organizational commitment that I would like to discuss, is affective commitment. As the term affective suggests, when we are talking about affective commitment, we are referring to an emotional commitment. You are wanting to stay in the organization. You feel there is an emotional connection between you and the organization. That is the reason you are interested in staying with the organization. That is the reason you are not thinking of leaving the organization, because you have an emotional connection, an emotional bond with the organization. You want to stay in the organization. So that's what we mean by affective commitment. To explain things better, let's compare this with our intimate relationships. If you have affective commitment with your partner, then you are staying with your partner because you love your partner, because you have a strong bond of love with your partner. That is the reason you are deciding to stick around, to not stray. That is the reason, okay? Because of that emotional connection that both of you have. That's what we mean by affective commitment. Now, the second form of commitment is called continuance commitment. In here, you are still deciding to stay, you are still deciding to stick around, but the reason is not the emotional connection that we were talking about in context of affective commitment. Here, it's a very calculated reason behind you deciding to stay with the organization. In simple words, you do a cost benefit analysis. Now, you may not literally take a sheet of pen and a paper and do a cost benefit analysis, even though you may do that, but you may sometimes just do it mentally. You just think over things. You decide the benefits of sticking around and the cost or the price that you have to pay if you left the organization. So you do this cost benefit analysis. And based on this analysis, you may decide to stay with the organization. Nothing to do with emotions here, nothing about you having that emotional connection with the organization. For example, you may decide to stay with your organization because right now, with the COVID pandemic going on, you believe that you may not get a better paying job offer. That's the reason you decide to stick around. Okay. You realize that you are staying because not because of your love for the organization, but because you feel like you have lesser options outside. You are afraid that you will not get the same kind of high paying job that you have now, or you may, let's say, lose on seniority. The seniority that you have in your current organization, you may lose that. Or there is a related construct called embeddedness. That is also another embeddedness. Embedded. Let's embeddedness. So if you have worked in an organization and you have lived in that town or in that area for a while, you tend to become more socially embedded in that area, right? Your kids start going to the local schools, and you have friends. You have friends also from the workplace with whom you are deeply embedded. So that is, you are deeply rooted in that community now. Now, if you leave your job, then you will lose that embeddedness. There is a price to pay. Your kids may be unhappy that you are moving them away from the school district that they are currently in. They may be very happy there. So you do a cost benefit analysis and you decide that, hey, it actually makes better sense to just stay until, let's say, the kids go to college, and then maybe I will leave, right? So what's happening here? You are doing a calculation of the benefits and the costs, and depending on where or which part has a greater weight, you may decide to stick around or may decide to leave. So that's what we mean by continuance commitment. And again, we can compare this with the kind of commitments that we may see also in intimate relationships. Not everyone who is in a committed relationship is there because of having that strong emotional connection with the partner. People stay around in relationships because of continuance commitment as well, meaning they do a cost benefit analysis. They may think on evaluation, they may realize that, hey, I have a huge price to pay if I break this relationship, maybe in terms of losing access to kids, maybe having to pay monetarily in form of child support payments or alimony. That's reasons like that. Or maybe if I leave my partner, I will lose access to the comfort that I have here, right? Maybe I get easy access to some deliciously cooked food that I will lose access to. So I'm now unsure whether I will ever get such delicious food by somebody else, cooked by another person. So I decide to stick around. Or it could be as simple as uh, you feel on reflection, you feel that you don't have good market value, and you decide to stay in the relationship because if you break the relationship, you are afraid that you will never get a better partner, right? So that's the reason you stick around. So that is what we mean by continuance commitment. Uh, while in affective commitment, you stayed because of the emotional connection you felt with the organization or with the person. In continuance commitment, you do a cost benefit analysis and decide to stay because of the benefits of staying outweighing the price that you would have to pay for leaving the organization or the person with whom you are partnered. The last type of commitment is what we call normative commitment. So normative commitment is based on obligations, sense of obligation. You may decide to stay with the organization because you feel a sense of moral obligation to stay. You feel some sort of moral pressure to stay because maybe the organization gave you your first break and you feel guilty to leave the organization, right? Maybe the organization uh, sponsored your undergrad degree or your higher education master's degree, and now that you have gotten your degree, you feel disloyal, you feel like a bad person uh, leaving the organization that helped you out so much, or the manager that helped you out when you were going through some difficulties. So you realize, so this is from a sense of obligation. And sometimes the sense of obligation can come from, overt pressure from your colleagues as well. Your colleagues could say, hey, no, how can you leave? You have to stay. So you feel that pressure to stay with the organization. Similar things happen also in intimate relationships. Like people often may decide to stay in a relationship because they feel obligated to stay. They feel it is immoral, maybe because of their religious upbringing or their cultural upbringing. They feel it is incorrect to break the relationship and they decide to stick around, right? In extreme cases, they may stick around even when there is abuse in the relationship. Or in less extreme cases, they may decide to stick around unless there is abuse. In that case, it may be fair to leave, but otherwise it is important that you stick around. So that's the kind of thinking that a person may have and may decide to stay in the relationship. So contrasting this with affective commitment, so there is no love anymore in the relationship. That deep emotional connection that you had before, you don't have it. You don't necessarily have it in normative commitment. You stay because of that sense of obligation that you feel for your partner or for the organization. So this is a summary slide of the different types of organizational commitment. As I mentioned, affective commitment is emotion-based, continuance commitment is cost-based, and normative commitment is obligation-based. And there are examples here for each of these types of commitment. Another way of thinking about it is affective commitment is because you want to stay. Continuance commitment is you need to stay, right? And if you leave, you will lose. So you need to stay. And in case of normative commitment, you ought to stay. So these are different ways of thinking about these three types of commitment. Now, which form of commitment is most desirable from the organization's point of view? Which form of commitment is what you would like to enhance, really enhance in your employees, in your subordinates? Or is it all of them? So these are the kind of questions that you should think about when you are thinking about organizational commitment. And well, the most important thing to keep in mind is this: just because somebody is sticking around or has stuck around with you for a long time, with the organization for a long time, we should not automatically assume that it is because of affective commitment. It could be because of continuance commitment or normative commitment, right? You should not assume anything. And if you understand the different types of commitment, then then you will make the effort to understand the reason behind why somebody is being committed, and then act accordingly. Okay. Sometimes it may not matter to you whether or not the person is emotionally invested or not, whether or not the person feels that emotional connection or not. It may not matter to you, as it sometimes happens, or maybe even often happens in intimate relationships. Both the partners may be there in the relationship because of continuance commitment, right? Both the guy as well as the girl, I mean, if it is a heterosexual relationship that we are talking about, both may be deciding to stick around because of the benefits they are getting and because of the cost that is associated with leaving. They don't necessarily have that strong emotional bond with each other anymore, but they decide to stick around. So same thing could happen also in context of organizations and employees. It may benefit both of them to stick around, right? For the employee to stay in the organization and for the company to not fire this person, because this person probably still brings in some good value to the organization, due to which the organization may decide consciously that, hey, it makes sense to keep this person for some more time until I find an alternative. So anyway, these are the things that you should have good understanding of if you want to be able to manage people better in your organizations, wherever that you're working. So let's quickly go over the construct of withdrawal behaviors in a little bit more detail. Broadly, they are of two types: psychological withdrawal and physical withdrawal. And the examples that are listed here are from the workplace, though, as I have been mentioning, you may see some parallels from your personal relationships as well. That is the reason, this is really important. Understanding organizational commitment and withdrawal behaviors. If you understand these constructs really well, it will help you in many spheres of life, not just in your workplace. In any case, if we talk about the first type, physical withdrawal, the other one, of course, is psychological withdrawal. So physical withdrawal, some of the common examples are tardiness, showing up late to work. We have already mentioned this. Taking too long breaks. Your work break time may only be half an hour, but you take breaks that go up to an hour or maybe two. That's a problematic sign, right? But recognize that anytime you see somebody late to work, somebody taking long breaks, does not automatically mean that the person has low organizational commitment. Even though I mentioned that they tend to be, I said they tend to be in opposite directions, work in opposite directions. But there could be numerous reasons for withdrawal behaviors. Organizational commitment or lack of organizational commitment is just one of those reasons. For example, let's talk about long breaks. While I was growing up in India, it's not so much of a problem now, but then many of the people working in government organizations used to take too long lunch breaks. Their official break time may be just for an hour, but they would take breaks that go beyond an hour to 2 hours, 3 hours. Now, but these people, they had no intentions of leaving the organization, the government organization where they were working. So it was a clear case of physical withdrawal not being related to low organizational commitment. Now, why were they engaging in such behaviors then? Because they could get away with it, right? The checks and balances were few. So hey, there's no one checking. There is no penalty for taking long breaks. So I will very well take it. Okay, so that is the kind of attitude that was prevailing amongst many of these employees. So that's something that you should always keep in mind. Anytime that you are seeing any of these behaviors, withdrawal behaviors, you should not automatically assume that it is a sign of low organizational commitment. In fact, sometimes it could be a sign of you, the leader, not leading properly, right? For example, again, similar example, if you are not imposing the necessary discipline, the basic discipline that needs to be there at the workplace as a leader, if you do not penalize people for violating basic decorum at the workplace, then people may take you for granted and engage in some of these behaviors, right? They then become what we call our counterproductive work behaviors. They are then not just a sign of withdrawal behaviors, but then they become counterproductive work behaviors. So because some of these things you had also seen in counterproductive work behaviors, realize that. So when we are talking about withdrawal behaviors, we are talking about behaviors that are happening because of having lost the sense of attachment, the sense of commitment to the organization. So you start missing meetings, you are showing up late, and in, of course, extreme situation, you ultimately quit. So withdrawal behaviors can be a sign of low organizational commitment. You should look out for these behaviors, but do not automatically assume that they are a sign of low organizational commitment. That's the point. Especially, if somebody was always very committed, but of late the person is showing up late, or there could be other reasons. Maybe the person is having sickness in the family, maybe the person is going through some personal stress. So it's important that you explore and try to understand the reasons before you take the necessary actions. Okay, necessary and appropriate actions. In any case, coming back to psychological withdrawal, there are some examples. Daydreaming on the job, supposed to be working, but you are fantasizing about something else, some person. Socializing at work, spending inordinately high amounts of time at the water filter, looking busy. This is a common problem. You will see people pretending to be really busy working hard, but actually they're not working hard, right? So that's a problem. Moonlighting, taking up alternative jobs, and cyber loafing. This is especially a very common problem these days because of the easy access that people have to technology and to the internet. Now, if you are using your workplace time, your work hours on non-work related exploration of the internet, then that is cyber loafing and something that can be a dangerous sign, right? So both psychological withdrawal and physical withdrawal are can be signs of low organizational commitment. Things may start out as psychological withdrawal first, and then once the commitment becomes lower, that may shift to physical withdrawal, and in extreme cases it may then finally manifest in form of quitting. So this is something to be on lookout for. That's essentially what I'm saying here. I'm going to end this video with this 2x2 matrix that was proposed by Griffith in 1999. This is a really interesting matrix because it gives you some very good insights about the different types of employees that you may have and what you need to do or how you need to approach leading these different types of employees. So in here we have two variables. We have task performance. Again, we have discussed what task performance is in the previous video, so I won't delve on that here. But there could be people who are high task performers. They are doing really well on their job, or there could be low task performers. They are not doing well on the job for which they have been hired. And on this axis, we have organizational commitment, right? People could have high organizational commitment, irrespective of the type, normative, affective, or continuance, but they are committed. They want to stay in the organization. And there could be people with low organizational commitment. They are not as committed. They will leave the organization. So this then brings to four different categories based on the combinations. So we will discuss each of these categories. The first category are the stars. So these are both high on task performance and high on organizational commitment. As the term stars denote, these are really valuable for the organization. Why? Because they're great task performers, as well as they have an interest to stay with the organization. So it's really good for the organization. And you, as the leader of such employees who are stars, should also do everything in your capacity to retain these employees because they are great performers and are committed to the organization. And if I relate this with the different types of organizational citizenship behaviors, one of them was voice, if you remember from my previous lecture, which was a type of organizational citizenship behavior directed towards the organization, OCBO. So stars tend to engage in a lot of voice behaviors as well. They make suggestions for improvement in the organization because they have the intention of staying in the organization. If things aren't going well, they voice their suggestions of improving the process so that the organization could be made better, right? So those are your stars. Then we have what we call are the lone wolves. They are very good task performers as well, but they are not committed to the organization. If they are for some reason unhappy, some problems in the organization, once they get the opportunity to leave, they will leave. So they engage in what we call our exit behaviors. They literally quit the organization. So once they get an opportunity to leave, and they are likely to get many such opportunities because they are high task performers. So they will be in high demand even outside your organization, and they will easily quit, and they will be often the first people to leave the organization because they have those options outside the organization. They are marketable. Now let's take a look at the low task performers, right? And we have those who are citizens. Okay, they are low task performers, but they have high organizational commitment. Now these are of course not very valuable for the organization because they are low task performers. But they have an intention to stay with the organization. Whatever is the reason behind their intention, they have an intention to stay with the organization, right? So they are loyal to the organization. Now, contrast them with the stars. When the stars come up with any suggestions, people will be willing to listen to such people because they are great performers. But no one is going to listen to a poor performer giving all these great ideas for suggestions, right? First you do your job well before you make suggestions for improvement, right? So we tend to see passive loyalty from these people. They stay with the organization, but they lack the credibility to make any good substantial change in the organization. So that's your citizens. And finally, we have the apathetics. Apathetics. Okay, so they are both low on job performance, task performance, and low on organizational commitment. These people, they tend to just do the bare minimum so that they don't get fired, right? Um, they tend to neglect their job. And again, so these are people you do not necessarily want in your organization. They are not marketable outside because they are not high task performers. So they are similar to the citizens. They are not high task performers, and consequently they do not have a lot of market value outside the organization. So it then becomes your responsibility as a leader to make sure you do not have many of these apathetics in your organization. And maybe instead of they neglecting their job, unless they fix their ways, you may have to fire them, and you may have to fire them first before you fire anyone else. In any case, this was our discussion on organizational commitment and its relevance to leadership. Hope the insights that you got here will help you be a more effective leader in your workplace.